Hi everyone, it's Monica, and welcome back to Taylor-Made Cards for You. Many of you may not know that my favorite flower is a sunflower, and last year I created a really pretty digital kit of sunflower papers. So when I saw these sunflowers over at Life's Craft, and I knew they would match my papers perfectly, I knew I wanted to give them a try. This die set comes with 6 dies for the flowers, and then you have the centerpiece here, which I'm showing you, that can go on either one of the flowers, and it creates 2 types of flowers that you can create by layering the 3 dies. I also have some leaves here that work perfectly with this die, and they also came from Life's Craft. These 2 die sets are called Splicing Sunflower Decor Die and Different Types of Leaves Decor Die, and I'm going to show you how to put these together along with my sunflower paper and some vintage ephemera from my shop to create some beautiful sunflower cards perfect for spring. So let's go ahead and get started. Now this sunflower paper pack comes with 8 different designs. I went ahead and chose 2 of the designs and sized them down for an A2 card. And then I took my vintage photo distress ink and I edged the papers so that I can have more of a vintage look. Now I sized down the cardstock to 3 3/4 by 5 inches because I wanted to have a 1/4 of an inch to be able to mat it onto some cardstock in the end. So once I had my distress ink around both of my card bases, then it was time to add my second layer. Now for the second layer, I am using a bingo card that I did pre-size for you in the kit. And then I'm also using one of my vintage catalog cards from my vintage ephemera stash. Now the bingo card was sized down perfectly to fit the A2 card, but I had to trim down my catalog card just a bit to make sure that it would fit nicely onto my second card base. Now ordinarily I don't use my authentic vintage on my crafts or my cards, but I have an abundance of these catalog cards that I was able to get from a old library, so I don't mind using these because I have an abundance, and I do offer these in my shop as well. So if you do like to craft with vintage ephemera, be sure to check out the shop. All right, so once I had my catalog card trimmed down, I went ahead and got my distressing tool to go ahead and edge up some of the edges on my catalog card, and then I also added some more distress ink. Now I didn't add any of the distress ink or distress any of the edges on the bingo card because the bingo card isn't authentic vintage, and I felt that it was fine with the straight edges. So once I decided which piece would go on which, then it was time to go ahead and glue down my piece. Now I chose to use the catalog card on the busier background because I felt that adding the bingo card on the background on the left would just be a little bit too much for the eye, and that's why I decided to add the bingo card to the more subtle background that's on the right. Now the embellishment that I'm going to put over the bingo card and the catalog card is an embellishment that I had already created when I was playing with these sunflowers. The embellishment is basically the sunflowers with some twine underneath and then glued onto a vintage Viewmaster reel. Now don't worry, this is not a pristine vintage Viewmaster reel. This is actually the throwaway stash from my husband's shop where he sells pristine vintage Viewmaster reels and Viewmasters. I always tell him never throw away vintage items even if he can't sell them or use them, because if it's paper and if it's an ephemera piece, I can usually incorporate it into a card. So these vintage Viewmaster reels were perfect for my background on these cards because it really helped to showcase my sunflower. So once I knew what my second, or I should say my third layer was going to be, I went ahead and I started to put together my sunflowers. Now, like I showed you in the beginning, the sunflower dies have 3 layers. So I cut out 3 different coordinating papers to be able to layer my sunflowers. So before I started layering them, I went ahead, like I said, and I found 3 different coordinating colors. And then some of the sunflowers still had some of the bits in them. So I had to use my poker to get out some of those bits that were still in from die cutting. Now for the layering, you can layer these 3 dies any which way. There isn't really a bottom, a middle, or a top. So you can layer these however you want. You just want to make sure that when you're putting them together, you do tilt them slightly so that all the colors show through. All right, so the way that I approached layering my sunflowers was to add a piece of thin foam tape to the bottom sunflower and the middle sunflower. So once I decided which those 2 were going to be, I went ahead and I added the foam tape to the middle sunflower, and then I peeled off the sticky part, and then I just attached it to the bottom sunflower. Now that was enough lift for me. I did kind of play around with it, and I added foam to the top and the middle, but I felt like it just gave it a little bit too much lift and it didn't look realistic to me. So that's why I decided to only add the 1 layer. And then once I have the 2 sunflowers put together, then I take the 3rd sunflower and I just glue it right on top. And that became my embellishment. Now the die set also does come with the middle piece. So I found a contrasting color to go ahead and add to the middle. I didn't necessarily want to add the same color because that would kind of defeat the whole purpose. So I just found another piece that worked nicely, and I added that right to the middle. Now this middle piece also has some small pieces of dies or holes in it, so you might have to use your poker to get out some of those extra bits as well. But then once you get them all out, just add some glue and just pop it right on the middle, and there's your sunflower. Now I could have easily just popped my sunflower right onto the ViewMaster at this point, but I really wanted to give it more of a textured background, so that's when I decided to incorporate some twine in the background. So the twine string that I'm using here is a little bit thick, so I decided to unravel it so that way I would have thinner pieces and a longer string. So the twine, once I unraveled it, it had three pieces. So as you can see here, I'm just unraveling it, and then what I'll do is I'll tie all 3 pieces together at the ends to have one long piece. Now there really is no trick to adding the twine to the back of the sunflower. Essentially, you're just going to have a long piece of string, and you don't necessarily even have to have twine. It could be string, it could be thinner twine, maybe colored twine that you might have in your stash. Something basically that you can string together and create some sort of a cushion on the back of your sunflower. Just something to give it a little bit more texture. So once I had all the string unraveled, I went ahead and I tied them together, and I snipped off some of the excess where I tied them together. Now I have one long string. And then essentially what I'm going to do is I'm going to add some glue to the back of my sunflower, and then I'm going to just start creating some loops to create some texture. So as you can see here, I'm pretty generous with my glue because I want to make sure I have enough of that glue to be able to have that twine stick to it. And then I'm just kind of looping it around, making sure that the loops are a little bit bigger than the sunflower. Now this is going to create a nice cushion of texture. So be generous with this. If you cut off string that's just not quite enough, you can always add some more to your background, because remember, you're not going to be able to see the edges. All you're seeing are the loops. So I'm just wrapping my twine around the background of it, and again just kind of fluffing it up as I go along. And then I'm going to add an extra layer of glue just to be able to help it hold in place. So once I have all of my twine in place, like I said, I'm going to add some extra glue, but then I'm also going to punch out a round circle to be able to create a cushion, or kind of like a sandwich, to be able to hold it in place. Because remember, you're going to have to glue this embellishment onto your card, but you want to be able to have some sort of a flat surface to make sure that it will hold nicely onto the cardstock, and also to make sure that that twine stays sandwiched between your sunflower along with that little circle that we're going to be adding. Now I used a white punch, and as you're going to see here, a little bit of the white might show through when you flip over your sunflower. I wasn't overly concerned about this, but if this is something that concerns you, you can always punch the circle using some of the same cardstock that you used to cut out your sunflowers. Now we have a really nice embellishment with some great texture for the focal point of our card. So I'm going to go ahead and sit down this embellishment for just a minute just to let it dry, and I'm going to start working on the other card because that sunflower and that twine has been glued for a couple of days now and it's good to go. All right, so as you can see, I had already added the sunflower and the twine to the Vintage Viewmaster reel. Now all I need to do is add it to my card base. So again, I just added some glue generously to the back of the Vintage Viewmaster reel, and then I placed it onto the card pretty much in the middle, right over that vintage catalog card. And then I came back to the card on the right and I adhered again the Vintage Viewmaster reel to the card, and then I added the sunflower to the Viewmaster. Exactly the same process that I did on the first card. So as you can see, these cards really have some layers on them. So when you do stick them in the envelope, remember they are going to cost probably a little bit more because they are a little bit thick. Most of my greeting cards never go through the post office with one stamp. I usually have to add extra postage because I tend to embellish a little bit more than most people. But I just love the results that I get when I add these embellishments to cards. And when I'm giving a card to somebody, I want them to know that I've put my time and my effort into creating something special for them. So I really don't mind paying the extra postage. All right, so now that I have both of my Viewmasters on my cards, I went ahead and I added a little bit more distress ink to my leaves, and then I added that right under my sunflower. Now, typically at this point, I'll layer the card onto some solid cardstock just to make it pop a little bit. And a lot of times I go towards the black cardstock. But I had this copper glittery cardstock in my stash that I thought matched perfectly. So I went ahead and I cut this up and I added it to the back of my card just to give it a little bit of shimmer. Also, I wanted to make sure that this card was sturdy because as you can see, there's a lot of layers and these layers are a little bit heavier than most layers. So I wanted to make sure I had some sturdy cardstock to make sure it wasn't too flimsy and it would hold together. And at this point, I thought I was done, but I wasn't. I decided because I had a couple of layers here, I wanted to add some brads to each of the four corners just to make sure the cardstock held together. Even though I wanted the extra weight on my layers, sometimes when you have extra weight, the cards don't necessarily hold together for some reason. So I went ahead and I just added 4 brads on each corner with some of my copper brads, which not only held the cardstock together, but gave it a nice finishing touch. And with that, my cards were finished. So I hope that you've liked my process video on how to put together these beautiful sunflower cards. I just think they're gorgeous and I hope that you do as well. Now I will leave a list of all the products that I've used to create these cards along with the links to the stores. Be sure to check out my shop for the sunflower paper because this paper is gorgeous. And I will also leave links to Life's Crafts so you could check out not only the leaf die, but this beautiful sunflower die as well. Now, if you've enjoyed my video, please give me a thumbs up. And if you haven't subscribed to my channel yet, don't forget to hit that subscribe button. All right, everybody, thanks for stopping by, and we'll see you again next time.